The first kiss that lingered on Kip Holloway's lips as a 13-year-old boy still haunted him 17 years later, as his boots hit the dusty road leading into Redding, California. The setting sun painted the western sky with streaks of orange and purple, reminiscent of the wildflowers Lily Evans had worn in her hair that spring day in 1863, when she'd made his heart stop behind the weathered planks of the schoolhouse wall. It was August 1880 now, and Kip hadn't expected to return to the place that had shaped his boyhood. The town looked smaller than he remembered, though the distant outline of Mount Shasta remained an imposing sentinel watching over the valley. The Sacramento River still cut through the heart of the settlement like a lifeline, the water reflecting golden light as dusk approached. "Might as well face it," Kip muttered to his chestnut mare Penny. The horse flicked her ears back, perhaps the only creature who'd heard his stories of Lily Evans over the years. He adjusted his worn leather hat, pushing it back slightly as he surveyed the changes in Redding. New storefronts lined the main street, and the railroad that had only been talked about when he left was now a reality, with the station standing proudly at the edge of town. Kip had left Redding a heartbroken boy, fleeing the memory of soft lips and broken promises. He returned a man weathered by years working cattle across 3 states, his skin tanned and creased at the corners of his eyes, his frame lean but strong from countless hours in the saddle. The revolver at his hip wasn't for show. He'd used it enough times to keep himself alive on the frontier, though he took no pleasure in violence. "Newcomer," called out a voice as Kip rode past the sheriff's office. Kip reined Penny to a stop and nodded at the man with a silver star pinned to his vest. "Not exactly. Kip Holloway, left here in '63. The sheriff, a man with salt and pepper hair and a neatly trimmed mustache, squinted at him. "Holloway, Tom Holloway's boy." "Yes, sir." Kip felt a twinge of grief. "Though he's been gone some years now. Sorry to hear it, fine man." The sheriff extended his hand. "Sheriff Morris Blackwell, you passing through or staying?" "Not certain yet," Kip answered honestly, shaking the offered hand. "Looking for work, maybe." "Might want to try the Carson Ranch. Heard they're hiring hands." The sheriff paused. "Though if you're Tom's boy, don't you still have family land north of town?" Kip shifted in his saddle. "Suppose I do. Haven't been back to check on it." The thought of seeing the old homestead, empty and neglected, made his chest tighten. "Well, Prescott's Inn still takes boarders if you need a place tonight," Blackwell offered, obliged. Kip tipped his hat and nudged Penny forward, the weight of memories growing heavier with each clip-clop of hooves on the hard, packed dirt. He hadn't planned to ask, but the question burned on his tongue. He turned slightly in the saddle. "Sheriff, the Evans family, they still around?" The sheriff's expression changed subtly. "Old man Evans passed on about 5 years back. His daughter Lily took over teaching at the schoolhouse." He hesitated. "She's had her share of troubles, that one." Kip's heart hammered in his chest. "Troubles? Not my place to say." The sheriff glanced down the street. "School let out an hour ago. She usually stays late, grading papers and such." Kip nodded, trying to appear casual though his mouth had gone dry. "Thanks." He rode Penny toward Prescott's Inn, stabled her with care, and secured a room for the night. After washing trail dust from his face and hands, he stood staring at his reflection in the small mirror above the washbasin. The face looking back at him belonged to a stranger, a man with lines etched by sun and hard living, eyes that had seen too much death and disappointment. "She won't recognize you," he told himself. But even as he spoke the words, he knew they were a lie. Some connections couldn't be severed by time or distance. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple white clapboard building with a small bell tower. It looked much the same, though someone had planted rose bushes along the front walk. Kip approached slowly, his boots crunching on gravel. Through the front window he could see a slender figure moving about inside, erasing a blackboard. He stood frozen, one foot on the bottom step, his heart thudding painfully. Should he knock? Turn and leave? What right did he have to disrupt her life after all these years? The decision was made for him when the door swung open and Lily Evans stepped onto the porch, nearly colliding with him. She gasped, clutching a stack of books to her chest. "I'm sorry I didn't," she began, then stopped abruptly, her green eyes widening in recognition. Time seemed to suspend as they stared at each other. She was still beautiful, though different now, a woman of 30, not the girl of 13 who had haunted his dreams. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a neat bun, a few strands escaping to frame her face. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes, a maturity to her features that spoke of experiences, both joyful and painful. "Kip Holloway," she finally said, his name coming out like a breath she'd been holding for years. "Miss Evans." He removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his calloused hands and trail-worn clothing. A smile touched her lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's still Miss Evans, though it's been many years since I was your teacher's daughter sneaking notes to you during arithmetic." The memory hung between them, childish notes folded into elaborate shapes, passed under desks when her father, the schoolmaster, wasn't looking. "I heard about your father," Kip said softly. "I'm sorry." She nodded, her grip on the books tightening slightly. "Thank you. It's been 5 years now." She paused, studying his face. "You've changed. So have you." He shifted his weight, uncertain what to say next. How could he explain that despite the women he'd met in saloons and dance halls across the West, none had ever replaced the memory of his first kiss behind this very schoolhouse? "Are you staying in Reading?" she asked, a hint of caution in her voice. "I'm not sure yet." He gestured vaguely toward the north. "Thought I might check on my father's land." Something flickered across her face, concern. "The old Holloway place has been abandoned for years." "I've heard it's in poor shape." "Figured as much." He cleared his throat. "Sheriff mentioned you're teaching now." Her posture straightened slightly with pride. "Yes, 8 years now. I have 23 students this term." An awkward silence fell between them. There was so much to say, yet neither seemed able to find the right words. "Well," she finally said, "I should be going. I have papers to grade." "Of course." Kip stepped aside to let her pass, then summoned his courage. "Miss Evans, Lily, I wondered if you might allow me to call on you properly." "Perhaps Sunday after church." She hesitated, and he thought she might refuse. Then she nodded slightly. "I live in my father's old house. You remember the way?" "Yes, madam, I remember." "Sunday, then." She started down the steps, then paused and looked back at him. "It's good to see you again, Kip. Welcome home." As she walked away, Kip realized he was still holding his hat, clutching the brim so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He had come to Reading with no expectations, certainly not hoping to rekindle a childhood romance. Yet seeing her again had awakened something he thought long buried, a yearning for connection, for roots, for the kind of peace that had eluded him in his wandering years. The next morning, Kip rode out to the Holloway homestead. The 2-mile journey from town took him past familiar landmarks: the creek where he'd caught his first trout, the meadow where wild mustangs sometimes grazed, the stand of oak trees where he and his father had hunted quail. When the house came into view, he reined Penny to a stop, a lump forming in his throat. The small farmhouse looked forlorn, its paint peeled, one shutter hanging askew. The barn leaned precariously, and what had once been neat fields were now overgrown with weeds and saplings. Kip dismounted slowly, tying Penny to a fence post that still stood firm. He approached the house with caution, testing each porch step before putting his full weight on it. The door creaked open at his touch, and he stepped into the musty darkness of his childhood home. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that penetrated through dirty windows. The furniture remained, draped with sheets now gray with years of settled dust. In the kitchen, rusted pots still hung from hooks, and his mother's china cabinet stood against the wall, the precious dishes visible through the glass doors. Memories assaulted him, his mother singing as she kneaded bread dough, his father's deep laugh as they played checkers by lamplight, the crushing grief when his mother succumbed to fever when Kip was just 10. 3 years later, after that fateful kiss with Lily, when his father announced they were selling the farm and moving to Oregon to live with an uncle, Kip had run away rather than leave Redding and Lily behind. He'd written to his father. Once he found work with a cattle outfit in Nevada, receiving a terse reply that made clear his father's disappointment, but assured him the homestead would remain his inheritance. Years later, news reached him of his father's death from a fall, but by then Kip was driving cattle in Wyoming, too far away and too ashamed to return for the funeral. Now, standing in the silent house, the weight of his choices pressed down on him. He had abandoned this place just as surely as time and weather had ravaged it. Could anything be salvaged outside again? Kip surveyed the property with a more practical eye. The well still had water. The orchard, though wild and untended, had healthy trees. The fields could be cleared and planted again. With work, a lot of work, the Holloway farm could live again. But did he want to stay? Did he want to be a farmer after years of roaming free? And even if he did, what about Lily? The girl who had once promised to wait for him had built a life without him. The woman she had become was a stranger to him, despite the undeniable pull he still felt toward her. Kip spent the next 2 days in town, gathering information and supplies. He learned that Redding had grown since the railroad arrived, bringing new businesses and opportunities. He heard about Lily's dedication to her students and her work with the Church Ladies' Aid Society. He also discovered, through careful questioning, what the sheriff had meant by troubles. Lily Evans could have been married 6 times over, Mrs. Prescott told him as she served him breakfast at the inn. Handsome men, too, the banker's son, a railroad engineer, even Sheriff Blackwell before his wife passed, but she turned them all away. Any particular reason? Kip asked, trying to sound merely curious. Mrs. Prescott leaned closer. Some say she's still grieving her father, but I think it's more than that. There was talk, years ago, about a young man, her sweetheart, who died in the war. She never speaks of it, but Martha Jenkins swears she saw Lily place flowers on a grave in the cemetery, though no Evans fought in the war that I know of. Kip mulled this over as he purchased supplies: nails, tools, seed for winter wheat. A dead sweetheart. Or was it possible she had created a story to explain why she remained unmarried? By Sunday morning, Kip had cleared enough debris from the farmhouse to make it minimally habitable. He'd repaired the worst of the roof leaks and swept years of dust from the floors. He'd moved his few possessions from the inn, determined to at least try to make a go of the farm, whether or not Lily Evans still harbored feelings for him. He arrived at the small white church just as the bell was ringing. Conversations hushed as he entered, and he felt the weight of curious stares as he took a seat in the back pew. Midway through the first hymn, he spotted Lily near the front, her voice rising clear and sweet with the melody. The service passed in a blur. Afterwards, Kip stood awkwardly in the churchyard as parishioners greeted each other. Several men approached to introduce themselves, including Carl Carson, the rancher the sheriff had mentioned. "Heard you might be fixing up the old Holloway place," Carson said, a shrewd look in his eye. "Good piece of land that. If you're looking to sell, I'd be interested." "Not looking to sell just yet," Kip replied evenly. Thought I'd see if I can make a go of it first. Carson nodded, though his expression suggested skepticism. Well, if you change your mind or need work while you're getting established, my offer stands. As the churchyard emptied, Kip spotted Lily speaking with an elderly woman. She glanced his way, said something to her companion, then walked toward him. I thought we might walk to my house, she suggested. It's not far and the day is pleasant. They strolled side by side down Redding's Main Street, then onto a quieter lane lined with modest homes. Neither spoke at first, the silence filled with unasked questions. I visited the farm yesterday, Kip finally said. Started cleaning up a bit. You're staying then? Lily glanced at him, her expression guarded, thinking about it. He hesitated. I heard you've turned down several suitors over the years. Her cheeks colored slightly. Mrs. Prescott has been talking, I see. She mentioned something about a sweetheart lost in the war. Lily stopped walking, turning to face him directly. That was my explanation when the questions became too persistent. It seemed simpler than the truth. And what is the truth? Kip asked, his heart racing. Her green eyes met his unflinchingly. That I made a promise to a boy behind a schoolhouse wall, and though he left without a word, I could never quite bring myself to break that promise. The world seemed to still around them, the bird song, the distant church bell, even the breeze through the cottonwood trees faded away. All Kip could hear was the thundering of his own pulse. I was 13, he said hoarsely. I didn't know how to fight for what mattered. I ran because I couldn't bear to say goodbye. And I was 13, she replied softly, too young to understand that sometimes love isn't enough against the currents that pull people apart. They resumed walking, the silence between them different now, charged with acknowledgement of feelings long buried, but never truly forgotten. Lily's house was a neat white cottage with blue shutters and a small garden bursting with late summer blooms. Inside, the furnishings were simple but comfortable, reflecting her modest teacher's salary and practical nature. She prepared tea while Kip sat at the kitchen table, watching her move efficiently about the small space. This domestic scene struck him as both strange and familiar, as if he were glimpsing an alternate life they might have shared. Tell me about your years away, Lily said as she poured the tea. Where did you go after you left? Kip wrapped his hands around the warm cup. Worked my way south first, found a cattle outfit headed to Nevada. Spent 3 years there before moving on to Wyoming, then Montana. He paused, considering how much to share. Did some cowboying, some scouting for the Army, tried my hand at prospecting once but found more blisters than gold. Were there women? She asked directly, surprising him with her forthrightness. He met her gaze steadily. Yes, none that lasted, she nodded, accepting this without visible judgment. And now, why return after all this time? It was the question he'd been asking himself since he'd ridden into Redding. My father left me the land. Seemed time to decide what to do with it. He took a sip of tea, and maybe I needed to face the past I've been running from. The past being me. There was a hint of challenge in her voice. You, my father, the choices I made. Kip set down his cup. I've spent 17 years with no roots, Lily. Moving on whenever things got complicated, I'm tired of it. So Redding is just a place to rest. Her tone was neutral, but he sensed her guarding herself against disappointment. It's more than that. He leaned forward, needing her to understand. I've seen a lot of country, met a lot of people, but I never found another place that felt like home, or another woman who made me feel the way you did that day behind the schoolhouse. Color bloomed in her cheeks. We were children. Yes, but what I felt wasn't childish, even if I didn't have words for it then. He hesitated, then reached across the table to touch her hand. I'd like to get to know the woman you've become, Lily, if you'll let me. She didn't pull away from his touch, but her expression remained cautious. "People will talk. They already are, seeing you in church this morning." "Let them," he said with more confidence than he felt. "Unless you'd rather I stayed away." "No." The word came quickly, surprising them both. She smiled then, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her since his return. "I'd like to get to know you too, Kip Holloway. The man, not the boy from my memories." They spent the afternoon talking about her teaching, his travels, the changes in Reading, their separate joys and sorrows over the years. As shadows lengthened across her small parlor, Kip reluctantly rose to leave. At the door, he hesitated. "May I call on you again?" "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." Her smile had grown easier over the hours they'd spent together. "Tuesday evening. I could bring supper from the hotel. Tuesday would be lovely." She stood in the doorway, framed by the golden light of sunset. "Good night, Kip." He walked back to the Holloway farm as dusk settled over the valley, his mind replaying every word, every gesture of their afternoon together. For the first time in years, he felt something like hope taking root inside him. The following weeks established a pattern. Kip divided his days between working on the farm and taking occasional jobs with Carl Carson to earn cash for supplies. His evenings increasingly belonged to Lily, whether sharing meals at her cottage, walking along the river, or attending town socials together. October brought cooler weather and a shift in their relationship. One evening, as they sat on Lily's porch watching the sunset paint the western sky, Kip found the courage to ask the question that had lingered between them. "Why did you never marry?" he asked quietly. "The real reason, not the story you told the town." Lily was silent for so long that Kip feared he'd overstepped. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "At first, I truly believed you'd come back. I was 16 when I realized you probably wouldn't." She twisted a loose thread on her shawl. "By then, I'd developed a reputation as someone serious about education. I went to Sacramento for teacher training, and when I returned, I found I valued my independence." She glanced at him. "The men who courted me expected me to give up teaching once I married. I wasn't willing to do that, and perhaps—" She hesitated. "Perhaps I measured them all against a memory that grew more perfect with time." Kip's throat tightened. "I'm far from perfect, Lily. I know that now." She smiled softly. "The real Kip Holloway is more interesting than my memory, more complex, with rough edges and scars I couldn't have imagined, but also with a kindness and depth I only glimpsed in the boy." He reached for her hand, and she twined her fingers with his. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell and stars appeared overhead. "I should go," he said eventually, though he made no move to leave. "Yes," she agreed, equally still. Their first kiss in 17 years happened there on the porch, as naturally as breathing. Her lips were soft beneath his, hesitant at first, then responding with a warmth that made his heart ache. When they pulled apart, Kip rested his forehead against hers. "I never forgot you," he whispered. "Not once in all these years." As autumn deepened toward winter, Kip made slow but steady progress on the farm. He repaired the barn roof, cleared fields for spring planting, and made the house weathertight. He bought 2 milk cows and half a dozen chickens, establishing the beginnings of a working homestead. The townsfolk gradually accepted his presence, particularly as his relationship with their respected schoolteacher became apparent. Some of the older residents remembered Tom Holloway's boy and were pleased to see the abandoned farm coming back to life. Not everyone was so welcoming. Carl Carson continued to make overtures about buying the Holloway land, growing increasingly persistent as Kip declined. "That valley section would connect my north and south pastures," Carson explained one day as they rode the fence line of his ranch. "I'd pay top dollar." "It's not about the money," Kip replied, uncomfortable with Carson's intensity. "That land is my inheritance, my chance to build something lasting." Carson's expression darkened. "Building something lasting requires more than good intentions, Holloway. It takes capital, connections, and the right friends in this valley." The implied threat wasn't lost on Kip, but he merely tipped his hat and rode away. That evening he mentioned the conversation to Lily as they sat by the fire in her cottage. "Carl Carson has been trying to expand his holdings for years," she said, frowning. "He's not used to being refused." "Is he dangerous?" Kip asked bluntly. Lily considered this. "Not openly, but he has influence with the bank, the mercantile, even the water commission." She looked troubled. "Be careful, Kip. I've seen small farmers squeezed out when they crossed Carson." Her concern touched him. "I can handle Carson," he assured her, though privately he wondered if the rancher might prove a more formidable adversary than he anticipated. 2 days later, Kip discovered his newly repaired irrigation ditch had been sabotaged, the water diverted away from his fields. It took a full day to repair the damage, during which Sheriff Blackwell paid a visit. "Any idea who might have done this?" the sheriff asked, surveying the muddy channel. "I have my suspicions," Kip replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "But no proof." Blackwell nodded thoughtfully. "Carson's been mighty interested in your place. You think he'd stoop to this?" "Not personally." The sheriff gestured toward the distant hills where Carson's ranch sprawled. "But he employs men who don't ask questions when silver crosses their palms." "What would you advise, Sheriff?" Blackwell sighed. "Officially, stay vigilant, report any further incidents." He paused. "Unofficially, Carson respects strength. If you back down, he'll keep pushing until you break or sell." The warning weighed on Kip's mind as November turned cold and wet. He doubled his efforts on the farm, determined to prove his commitment to staying. When Carson's men accidentally drove cattle across his newly planted winter wheat field, Kip confronted them directly, his hand resting casually on his revolver. "Next time, I'll consider it rustling," he said evenly to the foreman, "and I'll act accordingly." The men withdrew, but Kip knew the matter wasn't settled. That evening he arrived at Lily's house distracted and tense. "What's happened?" she asked immediately, reading his mood. He explained the confrontation, watching her expression grow concerned. "Perhaps you should sell," she suggested hesitantly. "Find land elsewhere away from Carson's influence." "Run again, you mean?" Kip shook his head. "I've spent too many years running, Lily. I'm making my stand here." Her green eyes studied his face. "Because of the farm or because of me?" "Both," he admitted. "The farm is my heritage, my father's legacy, but you—" He took her hands in his. "You're my future if you'll have me," she inhaled sharply. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "Not yet," he said honestly. "I won't ask until I'm certain I can provide a proper home, a secure life." Carson's threats complicate that. Disappointment flickered across her face before she masked it. "I understand." But her withdrawal was palpable, and Kip left that night feeling he'd somehow failed a test he hadn't known he was taking. The following Sunday, Lily was polite but distant at church. She declined his invitation to dinner, citing papers to grade. Kip rode home alone, the gray November sky matching his mood. He was checking the chicken coop when he spotted the smoke, a thin, dark plume rising from the direction of his barn. Running toward it, he saw flames already licking at the wooden structure where he'd stored his winter hay. For 2 frantic hours, Kip fought the fire alone, using buckets from the well to douse the flames. He managed to save the barn structure, though the hay was lost and part of the roof would need replacing. Exhausted and smoke-stained, he slumped against the corral fence, staring at the smoldering remains of his hard work. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made him look up. Sheriff Blackwell dismounted, surveying the damage with a grim expression. "Happened to be riding by and saw the smoke," he said, though his route from town suggested otherwise. "Convenient timing," Kip replied, too tired for pretense. "Found these by the barn door." Blackwell held up a matchbox with a distinctive red label. "Same matches they stock at Carson's bunkhouse." Kip took the matchbox, turning it over in his blackened hands. Proof enough for an arrest, not even close. The sheriff looked genuinely regretful. Carson's too smart to be connected directly. His men would claim the matches were stolen or lost. "So he just gets away with it?" "Not necessarily." Blackwell's voice hardened. "Sometimes justice works outside the courtroom in these parts." Kip understood the implication. "I'm not looking to start a range war, Sheriff." "Good man." Blackwell nodded approvingly. "But standing up for what's yours isn't starting a war, it's preventing one. Men like Carson only push until someone pushes back." After the sheriff left, Kip washed in the cold water of the pump, changed his smoke-reeking clothes, and rode to town. He didn't go to the sheriff's office or the saloon where Carson's men drank. Instead, he tied Penny outside the schoolhouse and waited. When Lily emerged, she stopped short at the sight of him, her eyes widening at his appearance. "What happened to you?" She rushed forward, touching his face where a streak of soot still marked his cheek. "Carson's men burned my hay." He captured her hand, holding it against his face. "I've been thinking, Lily, about what matters." Her expression softened. "And what did you decide?" "That I was a fool the other night." He took a deep breath. "I don't need to wait for the perfect moment or the perfect circumstances. I've wasted too many years already." Around them, children scampered home from school and townspeople went about their business, but Kip was aware only of Lily's face, hope and wariness battling in her eyes. "Carson won't stop," he continued. "He'll keep coming after my land, but I'm not fighting for just land anymore." He squeezed her hand. "I'm fighting for a future, for a life with you if you still want that." "Kip Holloway," she said, her voice catching, "are you asking me to marry you on the schoolhouse steps, covered in soot, with Mrs. Henderson watching from across the street?" He glanced over to see the postmaster's wife indeed observing them with undisguised interest. A laugh escaped him. "I suppose I am. Not very romantic, is it?" "On the contrary." Lily's smile bloomed like a winter rose, unexpected and all the more precious for it. "It's perfectly us." "The answer is yes, by the way." Kip kissed her then, heedless of soot or spectators, feeling 17 years of wandering finally come to an end. When they broke apart, both breathless, he grinned. "Shall we give Mrs. Henderson something else to talk about and take a walk behind the schoolhouse?" Lily laughed, the sound like music. "I think that's an excellent idea." Hand in hand, they walked to the spot where, as children, they had shared their first innocent kiss. The old wooden wall still stood, weathered by time but sturdy. Kip touched the rough planks, remembering. "I was so nervous that day," he admitted. "My palms were sweating." "Mine too." Lily leaned against the wall. "I'd practiced kissing my pillow the night before." He raised an eyebrow. "Really?" She nodded, her cheeks pink. "I didn't want to disappoint you. You could never disappoint me." He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not then, not now." Their kiss this time was different, no childish awkwardness, but the deep, knowing connection of adults who had found their way back to each other through years and miles of separation. They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church, with most of Reading in attendance. Carl Carson was conspicuously absent, though Sheriff Blackwell reported the rancher had been seen riding toward Sacramento the day before, muttering about stubborn fools. After the simple ceremony, the town celebrated with a feast at the Prescott Inn. Mrs. Prescott, who had appointed herself unofficial matchmaker, beamed with satisfaction as she served her famous apple pie. "I knew from the moment he asked about you," she told Lily. "Some connections can't be broken, not by time nor distance." Later, as they drove the wagon to the Holloway farm, their home now, Kip glanced at his bride, still amazed that the dream he'd carried for so long had become reality. "Happy?" he asked, covering her gloved hand with his. "Completely." She rested her head against his shoulder. "Though I'm still not sure how we'll manage with Carson determined to drive us out." "About that." Kip guided the horses around a bend in the road. "Sheriff Blackwell had some interesting news this morning. Seems Carson's been called to Sacramento to answer questions about some irregularities in his land titles. Could be tied up for months." Lily straightened. "How convenient, isn't it?" Blackwell mentioned something about an anonymous letter sent to the land commissioner, with copies of documents that should have been locked in the county records office. Documents that someone with access to the school's county archives might have discovered while researching local history. Lily asked innocently. Kip grinned at her. "Remind me never to underestimate you, Mrs. Holloway." She laughed, the sound bright in the crisp winter air. "I may be a school teacher, but I learned long ago that sometimes justice needs a little help." As they crested the hill, the Holloway farmhouse came into view. Smoke curled from the chimney where Kip had lit a fire before leaving for the wedding. Lanterns glowed in the windows, welcoming them home. In the fading light, the freshly painted walls gleamed white against the darkening sky. "It's beautiful," Lily whispered. "It's just the beginning," Kip promised. That winter was harsh, with heavy snow and bitter cold, but inside the farmhouse, Kip and Lily created a warm haven. They established rhythms and routines, learning to blend their separate lives into one shared existence. Lily continued teaching, riding to town each morning on the mare Kip gave her as a wedding gift. Kip worked the farm, preparing for spring planting and making plans to expand once the weather warmed. News arrived in February that Carl Carson's legal troubles had deepened. The land commissioner had found evidence of fraudulent claims dating back years, and Carson's empire began to crumble as investigations widened. "He won't bother us again," Sheriff Blackwell assured them one Sunday after church. "Man's got bigger problems than your little farm now." With the immediate threat removed, Kip and Lily focused on building their future. They planted fruit trees along the drive, repaired fences, and acquired more livestock. By April, the farm was showing signs of prospering, with green shoots emerging in the fields and new calves wobbling beside their mothers in the pasture. One evening in late spring, as they sat on the porch watching twilight settle over the land, Lily took Kip's hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "I think we'll need to add a cradle to your carpentry list," she said softly. Kip's eyes widened, then filled with wonder. "A baby?" "You're certain?" She nodded, her smile radiant. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. By Christmas, we'll be 3. He gathered her into his arms, his heart so full he could barely speak. "Thank you," he finally managed. "For what? For waiting. For believing in second chances." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "For making that schoolhouse wall the beginning of our story, not the end." As darkness fell and stars appeared overhead, Kip Holloway held his wife close, marveling at how the path of his life had circled back to where it began, to Redding, to the farm, to Lily. Only now, instead of running away, he was running towards something. A future bright with promise, rooted in the land his father had loved, and the woman who had claimed his heart with a single kiss behind a schoolhouse wall, all those years ago. The months passed in a blur of activity as Kip prepared the farmhouse for the coming child. He built a cradle from oak harvested on their land, crafted a rocking chair for the nursery, and expanded the kitchen garden with herbs Lily said would be needed for the baby. Lily's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though by October she reluctantly reduced her teaching schedule to half-days. The school board, unwilling to lose her completely, arranged for an assistant to handle her afternoon classes. "I feel like I'm neglecting my students," she confessed to Kip one evening as they sat by the fire, her hands resting on her rounded belly. "You're preparing to teach the most important student of all," he reminded her, covering her hands with his. As if in agreement, the baby kicked against their palms, making them both laugh. November brought an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Blackwell rode out to the farm one blustery afternoon, his expression grave as Kip met him in the yard. "Carl Carson died last night in Sacramento," the sheriff announced without preamble. Heart gave out, according to the telegram. Kip absorbed this news, surprised by his lack of satisfaction. The man had tried to drive him from his land, had threatened his livelihood, yet Kip could find no joy in his passing. "What happens to his ranch?" he asked. "That's partly why I'm here." Blackwell dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post. "His lawyer contacted me this morning. Seems Carson had no direct heirs. His will divides the property among several parties." The sheriff paused. "Including you, me." Kip stared in disbelief. "That can't be right." "That's what I said. But apparently Carson left you the North Valley section, the land that connects to your property." Blackwell shook his head in wonderment. "Lawyer says Carson changed his will last month, included a note saying he respected a man who stood his ground." Kip leaned against the corral fence, trying to make sense of this turn of events. "I don't understand." "Nor do I fully," the sheriff admitted. "But I've seen men like Carson before. They fight hard against worthy opponents, but there's a kind of twisted respect there too." He handed Kip an envelope. "Lawyer said to give you this, said it would explain." Inside was a brief letter in a spidery hand. "Holloway, a man measures another by how he fights for what matters. You fought clean when you could have fought dirty. You protected your woman and your land without becoming the kind of man I've been. That deserves recognition. The North Valley is yours. Do better with it than I did. Carson P.S. That schoolteacher of yours has spirit. The documents she found would have remained buried if not for her persistence. Tell her I said well played." Kip read the letter twice, then passed it to Lily when she came outside to join them, drawn by their serious expressions. "I don't know whether to be grateful or suspicious," she said after reading it. "The deed's genuine," Blackwell assured them. "I checked it myself. 200 acres, including the spring that feeds both properties." That night, after the sheriff had gone, Kip and Lily stood on their porch looking out over the land that had unexpectedly expanded. "What will you do with it?" Lily asked, leaning against him, her pregnancy making her seek his support more often. He corrected gently. "It's our land, Lily. As for what we'll do—" He gazed at the distant hills now visible in the moonlight. "I'm thinking apple orchards. That western slope gets good sun and the soil's right." "Orchards," she repeated thoughtfully. "That's thinking of the future. Trees take years to mature." "Yes," he agreed, wrapping his arms around her, his hands cradling their unborn child. "I'm planning for the long haul now." December arrived with a series of storms that blanketed the valley in snow. Kip kept the farm running smoothly despite the weather, ensuring the animals were sheltered and fed, the house warm and snug. Lily, now in her final month of pregnancy, nested like a contented bird, preparing the nursery and knitting tiny garments on Christmas Eve. They sat in the parlor after dinner, a small fir tree decorated with paper ornaments and strung cranberries filling the room with the scent of pine. Outside, snow fell silently, adding to the blanket of white that covered the farm. "I have something for you," Kip said, retrieving a small package from behind the sofa. Lily unwrapped it carefully, gasping when she saw the locket inside a delicate gold heart on a fine chain. "It's beautiful," she whispered, opening it to find a tiny dagria type of kip on one side, the other empty. "I thought we could put the baby's picture there when it comes," he explained, helping her fasten it around her neck. "It's perfect." She touched it reverently, then winced suddenly, pressing a hand to her side. "Lily," Kip's voice sharpened with concern. "I think," she said with remarkable calm, "that your child has decided to arrive in time for Christmas." What followed was the longest night of Kip's life. The midwife arrived through the snow, bringing with her an air of calm competence that somewhat eased his panic. Banished to the kitchen while the women worked in the bedroom, Kip paced, prayed, and occasionally pressed his ear to the door, heart racing at each muffled sound of Lily's pain. Near dawn, as the eastern sky lightened behind snow-laden clouds, a new cry joined the sounds of the awakening farm, the lusty wail of a newborn announcing its arrival. The midwife opened the door, her tired face wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Mr. Holloway. You have a son." Kip entered the bedroom on shaky legs. Lily, exhausted but radiant, held a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as he approached, her eyes shining with a joy that matched the overwhelming emotion in his own heart. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Kip sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring in wonder at the tiny red face with its shock of dark hair. When the baby's eyes opened briefly, he caught a glimpse of cloudy blue that the midwife assured him would likely change to match one of their eye colors in time. "He's perfect," Kip whispered, touching a finger to his son's miniature hand. The baby's fingers curled around his in a grip that seemed impossibly strong for one so small. "What shall we call him?" Lily asked, though they had discussed names for months. "Thomas," Kip said without hesitation. "After my father." "Thomas Evans Holloway," Lily agreed, her voice tender. "Born on Christmas Day, 1880. As morning light filtered through the curtains, painting the room in a soft golden glow, Kip Holloway looked at his wife and newborn son, and felt a completeness he had never known in all his years of wandering. This was what he had been searching for, not just a place to belong, but people to belong to. "Merry Christmas, Lily," he said, leaning forward to kiss her forehead. "The merriest," she agreed, her smile as bright as the morning star. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. Young Thomas grew from a colicky infant to a sturdy toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's inquisitive green eyes. The farm prospered despite occasional droughts and harsh winters. The apple orchards Kip planted on the North Valley land began to bear fruit by the time Thomas was 4, producing sweet, crisp apples that found a ready market in Sacramento. Lily returned to teaching part-time when Thomas turned 3, bringing their son with her to the schoolhouse 3 days a week. The arrangement raised eyebrows at first, but the sight of young Thomas sitting quietly with his picture books while his mother taught soon became a familiar one in Reading. In the spring of 1885, their family expanded again with the birth of a daughter, Eliza, who arrived with considerably less drama than her brother, choosing a mild April afternoon to make her appearance. Thomas, now 5 and full of importance as a big brother, appointed himself her special protector, a role he took very seriously. By 1890, the Holloway farm had become one of the most prosperous in the valley. Kip's orchards produced not only apples but peaches and pears as well. They had added a larger barn and expanded their livestock to include a small herd of quality beef cattle. The farmhouse, once dilapidated and forlorn, now stood proudly among mature shade trees, its white clapboard gleaming in the California sun. That summer, as they celebrated Thomas's 10th birthday with a picnic by the river, Lily watched their children playing with the offspring of other Redding families and squeezed Kip's hand. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked, gesturing to the scene before them, the laughing children, the laden picnic tables, the sense of community and belonging. Kip shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "When I left Redding, I couldn't see beyond my own hurt. When I returned, I couldn't see beyond making amends. This." He waved a hand to encompass their children, their friends, the life they had built. "This was beyond imagining." "Not beyond hoping, though," Lily reminded him, resting her head against his shoulder. "I always hoped." As they watched, Thomas led a group of children in a game of tag, his confident voice calling out rules and boundaries. Eliza, her auburn braids flying behind her, raced to keep up with the older children, determination in every step. "They're growing so fast," Kip observed. "Too fast," Lily agreed, "though I have news that might make you feel better about that." She placed his hand over her stomach, a familiar gesture that never failed to fill him with wonder. "We'll have another little one come winter." Joy spread across Kip's face. "Really? You're certain?" She nodded, eyes twinkling. "Quite certain. Dr. Miller says January or early February." Their third child, another boy they named James, arrived during a January blizzard in 1891. Unlike his siblings, he had Lily's auburn hair and Kip's brown eyes, a perfect blend of them both. As the children grew, the rhythm of farm life shaped their days and seasons. Thomas showed an early interest in the business side of farming, accompanying Kip to markets and negotiations by the time he was 12. Eliza inherited her mother's love of learning, devouring books and begging to attend the high school in Sacramento when she turned 14. Young James revealed a natural affinity for animals, spending hours in the barn and fields, an instinctive understanding of livestock that amazed even experienced hands. In 1898, as war with Spain loomed, Thomas, now 18 and finished with schooling, approached his parents with a serious expression. "I want to enlist," he announced over supper one evening. "Many of my friends are joining up." Kip and Lily exchanged glances heavy with memory and concern. They had raised their children on stories of the Civil War's devastation, hoping to instill a healthy respect for peace. "War isn't an adventure, son," Kip said carefully. "Men die painful, lonely deaths far from home." "I know that, Pa," Thomas replied with the earnestness of youth. "But if there's fighting to be done, I want to do my part." In the end, they gave their reluctant blessing, watching with pride tinged with fear as their firstborn donned a uniform and departed for training. The months that followed were anxious ones, with Lily scanning each newspaper for news of casualties, Kip working longer hours to keep worry at bay. When Thomas returned unharmed in early 1899, the war having ended quickly, the relief in the Holloway household was palpable. He came back changed, more serious, more appreciative of the peaceful farm and the family he had temporarily left behind. Within a year, he had married Mary Carson, the granddaughter of Carl Carson's brother, in a union that symbolically healed old wounds and joined two of the Valley's prominent families. Eliza, always independent, surprised them by announcing her intention to attend the Teachers' College in San Francisco. "Like mother, like daughter," Kip remarked when she showed them the acceptance letter. Though they would miss her, neither Kip nor Lily considered standing in the way of her dreams. They had both experienced the pain of thwarted ambitions and were determined their children would have the freedom to choose their own paths. By 1905, the Holloway farm had evolved into a true family enterprise. Thomas and his wife had built a home on the northern section of the property, where they were raising twin boys who already showed signs of inheriting the Holloway determination. Eliza had returned from college to teach at Redding's expanding school, though she maintained her own small house in town, valuing her independence while remaining close to family. James, now 14, worked alongside Kip, soaking up knowledge about the land and animals that would one day be partly his. That spring, as apple blossoms dusted the orchards with white and pink, Lily found Kip standing beside the old schoolhouse, now expanded and modernized but still recognizable as the place where their story had begun. "Feeling nostalgic?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. At 55, Kip Holloway's dark hair was liberally streaked with silver, and lines of experience mapped his face, but his eyes still held the warmth that had first drawn Lily to him all those years ago. "Just remembering," he replied. "It's been 42 years since you kissed me behind that wall." He nodded toward the weathered wooden barrier that still stood at the edge of the schoolyard, now serving as a backdrop for children's games rather than secret meetings. "Technically, you kissed me," Lily corrected with a smile. At 52, she remained lovely, her auburn hair faded to a softer shade but still thick and shining, her green eyes as bright as ever. "Semantics," Kip grinned, taking her hand. "Either way, it was the most important moment of my life, though I didn't know it then. More important than our wedding day, or the births of our children. Those were the fruits," he explained. "That kiss was the seed." He gestured toward the thriving town around them, the distant view of their farm with its sprawling orchards and fields. "All of this grew from that moment in a way. If I hadn't kissed you, I might never have left. If I hadn't left, I might never have returned with eyes that could truly see what I had here." Lily squeezed his hand. "For someone who once claimed words weren't his strength, you've become quite philosophical, Mr. Holloway." "I've had an excellent teacher, Mrs. Holloway." He bent to kiss her, not caring that they stood in full view of the town, their hair graying and their faces lined with age. In his heart, they were still those children behind the schoolhouse, discovering the first stirrings of a love that would endure through separation and reunion, through struggle and prosperity, through all the seasons of a life fully lived. As they walked home together through the apple orchards now in full bloom, petals drifting around them like fragrant snow, Kip reflected on the journey that had brought him full circle from a boy running away from his first kiss to a man who had built a legacy on the foundation of that remembered moment. They had faced drought and flood, illness and health, joy and sorrow, always together, always stronger for having found each other again. Ahead, their farmhouse stood welcoming in the afternoon sun, smoke curling from the chimney where James would have lit a fire against the spring chill. On Sunday, their extended family would gather for dinner, Thomas and Mary with their growing boys, Eliza with news from the school, perhaps even a few of the neighbors whose lives had intertwined with theirs over the decades. "We've been blessed," Lily said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "Beyond measure," Kip agreed, his heart full as he looked at the woman who had waited for him, who had believed in second chances when he hardly dared hope for one himself. The cowboy who had never forgotten his first kiss had found his way home at last, not just to Redding or to the Holloway farm, but to the enduring love that had begun behind a schoolhouse wall and had sustained them through all the years between.